at some point we're going to be writing a few things, not much. The problem with writing workshops online is that a lot of it is just go away for 20 minutes and write something. We're not going to do that. It'll just be a couple of short things, but you will need pen and a paper, or the computer you're currently using is going to work just as well. I was going to say, before I start, I just want to quickly mention something that came up in the Q&A to the last ones, that we were talking about teaching poetry and teaching form, and I just wanted to mention that Atsushi has got an excellent paper on teaching haiku in the classroom in one of the issues of the Lilt journal. So if anyone's interested in teaching form in poetry, I thoroughly recommend they go and read that paper. I've stolen things wholesale from that I use in my classroom. So yeah, right. So, good afternoon. Actually, while I'm on the subject, before I get started, of the subject of Atsushi, this is great. This follows on pretty much exactly from what he was talking about. So he was talking about, well, one part of his talk was talking about teaching students' voice, using their own voice. I'm kind of going to take on from there and go a step beyond and talk about teaching them to write in other voices than their own. So, this sort of, naturally follows on from that, which is somewhat fortuitous, I think. So anyway, I'm going to be talking about character. This is pretty much based on lessons I currently still teach and have taught over the years. But it's also things I do myself when I'm writing fiction. So I'll give you a bit of a background, a bit of context, then take you through the activities, a couple of activities explaining what I do and why. And then, as this is a workshop, I'll give you the chance to try them out for yourself in a limited way, as I say. We're also going to have a couple of discussions in breakout rooms as well. And if time goes the way I want it to, we'll have a role play as well, which is always good fun. So yeah, as Tara said at the start, I'm a writer. I'm also an editor and a teacher of writing, as well, obviously, as a reader of literature. So I kind of occupy the center of a bunch of different Venn diagrams when we're talking about creative writing. I've published 5 books, as Tara said, 3 novels, a book of poetry, and my memoir. I've also worked as an editor for publishers in the UK. I now work freelance as an editor. And for the last 4 years, I've been teaching at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies, where in addition to the usual communication classes and academic writing classes, I teach that university's first ever creative writing class. I've taught creative writing in many different settings to young people and adults, to L1 English speakers and to L2 speakers. And in the main, I use the same activities with everyone. The only difference really between teaching creative writing to an L1 class and an L2 class, in my experience, is the language you use to set up the activities, which obviously changes depending on ability, and your expectations for production. I would expect university students in Britain to produce much more than my university students in Nagoya in a shorter space of time. When I was doing creative writing in my master's, we could reasonably be expected to produce a short story within a week. I think if I asked my third years at NUFS to produce a short story in a week, they would freak out and run away and not come back. It's not necessarily impossible. I think they would just be way more stressed than is strictly necessary. So yeah, a bit of context. At the moment, I teach creative writing to third year English majors. We don't have a first or second year course. It just kicks in at third year. Our students are English majors, and they start, when they come in first year, they're around B1 level on the Zephyr scale. So by third year, we hope they've improved somewhat from there. So they're reasonably high level students. We do study abroad programs in the summer and spring breaks, as well as 6 to 12 month programs. So the majority, if not all of the class, have lived and studied abroad at some point to some extent. To get this, we were talking earlier about how to get creative writing classes on the curriculum and past MECs. The way I did it was I first of all ran a pilot program for a few years, sort of no credit, in my own free time with volunteer students, to show that there was a demand amongst the students. I could demonstrate to the department, firstly, that students wanted the course and that it was worthwhile to do. I've written a paper about this, if anybody wants more detail about it. And it worked, it convinced the department. So from 2019, we changed the third year writing program from just plain old academic writing to optional electives. And to answer Cameron's question about mixed, this is how we got round mixed, is it wasn't just a creative writing class, it was optional optional electives, so they could choose creative writing or academic writing, journalism, business writing, a few different things, offering that range, which included traditional creative academic writing, satisfied the demands at mixed. The students all do academic writing in first and second year. One of the reasons is because they're going to study abroad for 6 or 12 months. A lot of them, they need to be able to write academic essays to the kind of standard the universities in the English-speaking countries will expect. The changes, the new third-year curriculum has proved pretty popular with the students, and I'd thoroughly recommend it if anyone else is looking to change their system. It's been great. So my course, I teach the creative writing. Over 2 15-week semesters, the class is divided into 4 units. We start, to answer Cam's question from earlier, we start with creative nonfiction. We start with travel writing, in part because travel is something they've all done, something they're all interested in. Even if they've never been abroad, they've traveled inside Japan. And also because creative nonfiction, one of the big beneficial things about it is that to a large degree, it sidesteps things like character and plot, character development and plot. The way I get them to do their travel writing, their main character is themselves, so they don't have to build a character up there. And the plot is pretty much just what happened to them, or the story anyways, what happened to them while they were traveling. We work on structure and things like that. So we changed that a bit, but it means they generally don't have to worry about character. They don't have to think too deeply about plot, so we can concentrate more on other aspects, on language and on structure. And I found it just helps to remove some of the stress and worry out of it by starting with creative nonfiction. Next, we do script writing. Script writing is something they have experience of at NUFS. So in their first year general English class, they have to script conversations between 2 people to practice unit topics and vocabulary. So they've got a little bit of experience with that, which is why I do it second. Again, it's not that scary. They sort of know what they're doing. And in that unit, we concentrate mainly on dialogue, on writing natural dialogue, and on little bits on exposition through dialogue as well. There's obviously a little bit of character building in script writing, but we don't focus too much on it. It's mostly dialogue. One of my arguments in some of the papers I've written, although I put it a bit nicer than this, is that academic writing can tend to suck the joy out of writing a little bit. The students get sort of bogged down in APA rules and things like that and get away from the actual joy of the writing. And one of my aims in constructing this course is to put that back. With that in mind, in the second semester, we start with poetry. And a lot of what Atsushi said earlier on about his approach is echoed in my classes. It's about production. We're not too worried about form and things like that. Although I teach haiku, I teach acrostics, sort of the simpler forms. I'd love to teach sonnets and things like that, but it would take up quite a lot of time. So we do poetry, and it's been amazing. Just as an aside, this semester, as with Atsushi, I've had my students have produced some amazing stuff about COVID, and totally unprompted. I let them produce whatever they want. And there's just been amazing poems about how they're feeling and how they're suffering under the current situation. I asked my class if I could show some of them today, and they all said no, because they're embarrassed at how honest they were being. And I was like, okay, fine, no problem. So you'll have to take my word for it. But it's, it was a nice bit of therapy, I think, for them, as well as educational. And then the last unit, the fourth unit of my course, is fiction, which is where I am at the moment in the current curriculum. I keep fiction to the very end, partly just because it's quite daunting to say to them, straight off the bat. You know, we're going to write a short story, but also because the short story incorporates a lot of the elements present in the other genres. So travel writing, they've got used to writing a sort of long narrative. They've practiced dialogue and things like that. In script writing, in poetry, we do a lot of imagery, using metaphors, using similes. So they can incorporate things they've already done into their short story, and it's not just an overload of new stuff. The main things we focus on in fiction are character, which is what I'm going to go on to talk about, and plot, which I'll save for another day. So how it works in this when we get to the fiction is on the last day of Unit 3, and the last day of the poetry unit, I set them as homework just to come up with a character. It can be anyone they want or anything. Some of them love doing science fiction and fantasy, so they will come up with talking animals or aliens or dragons or this kind of thing. Anything they want. They don't have to write anything down at this stage. Just think about a character. That is the one rule I give them is that the character must not be themselves. Right? They've already written about themselves in travel writing, so they have to think of someone else. Then I give them a questionnaire, which I'm going to share with you now in two ways. One, I'm going to share my screen, obviously, but I'll also drop it into the chat. Hopefully this will work. So if you want to download it and open it and look at it on your own screen, hopefully this will work. Yeah, there you go. Hopefully you should see that. So you can open that, or just let me share my screen. One of the joys of teaching on Zoom and online this year is coming to learn exactly how often I just commentate on what it is I'm doing. I'm telling the students, I'm going to share my screen now. Now I'm going to do this. So this is a character questionnaire that I use with the students. Give you a second to look at that while I find my place. So I give them this questionnaire to fill in as homework. We wouldn't do this in class. Usually I'd get them to bring it in on paper to the next class, but obviously this year that hasn't been possible. So we just drop it in a Google Drive folder. This questionnaire is designed to do two things. Firstly, it focuses them onto little details about character beyond just the usual broad brushstroke things like name, age, hobbies, things like that. In fiction, it's often the small telling detail, the little idiosyncrasy that makes a character unique. And in my work as an editor, one of the most common problems I come across is two-dimensional characters that are not real, they're not believable. Most writers, their main character is great, especially if it's first-person narrative. We get the details, the little verbal tics, the thoughts, dreams, the fears that make up a normal human being. And secondary characters are often quite good as well, you know, the parents, the best friend, the lover, whatever the story might be. But after that, it tends to fall off quite quickly. Characters often tend to just be defined by their relationship to the main character. And the more tenuous the relationship, the vaguer the character, I've found. In a lot of cases, this doesn't really matter. You know, in a novel or in a short story, we don't really need to know the backstory of the Starbucks clerk or the taxi driver that drops them off at the airport. But often it can be one of the most common things I come across is that it will be the bad guy in the story, the villain if it's a thriller or a crime novel, or the parents or teachers if it's a young adult novel. The bad person is nothing but the bad person. They've got no personality beyond how they make the main character feel. And that just completely, certainly for me, undermines a story. It really weakens it. It makes it unbelievable and unrealistic. And I've found as a writer and as a teacher over the years that doing this questionnaire can really help with that problem. It focuses the mind and pushes it beyond just creating this cardboard cutout that helps to tell the story. The other thing it does, and certainly this is how I found it useful as a writer, is it gets me out of the trap of just imagining the character as kind of myself, but slightly changed, which is a really, really common problem writers come across. It's so easy to fall into habit. And if you do it with one character in something you're writing, then it's not a big problem. But if you start doing that with all the characters, at some point they're going to start overlapping and merging and becoming a kind of mush of personality. And that's obviously not very good. I started thinking about this and developing this questionnaire a few years ago when I was working on my third novel, The Waves Burned Bright. The main character, or one of the main characters in that book, is a 16-year-old woman from Aberdeen, my hometown. The book covers 30 odd years of her life, but chronologically, it starts off when she's a teenager. And I was having real trouble writing her as a character, not because she was a woman or anything like that, but because I created her as basically me, but with the gender switched. And that didn't work. That's not a character. It didn't work because she just came across as me as a 16-year-old, and nobody wants that. That's not a good thing to be. She wasn't herself. She wasn't her own character. I didn't realize this at the time, and I couldn't work out why I was struggling to write this until I tried to write a scene where her parents are away and she throws a party in her house. 16-year-old, of course you do. And I started to describe the music she was playing at the party. I started writing a scene where she was making up a mixtape for the party, full high fidelity style. And so this is set in 1988, and I just got obsessed with this mixtape that she was making. I fell down a rabbit hole trying to decide which great albums from the late 80s she was playing. So all this REM stuff, Sonic Youth, the Pixies, Dinosaur Jr. And I was like, this is an amazing mixtape, and I started making up for myself. And then I realized that, of course, this is what I would have listened to if I was 16 in 1988. I wasn't 16 in 1988. I was 8 and definitely not listening to things like REM and the Pixies. But I was just making up my mixtape, not her mixtape. There was no character there. It was just me with a different name and a different gender. So I took a step back from it, rethought things, and started asking myself specific questions about her personality and about her tastes, questions that now in some form make up this questionnaire. And one of the things I asked, obviously, was about her musical tastes. Did she like, if she doesn't like the Pixies, did she like Kylie Minogue? Did she like Duran Duran? Whatever was big at the time. And at some point in the process, I realized that actually she didn't like music that much at all. There are some people in the world who just don't care about music all that much. They're quite happy to listen to whatever's on the radio. I fundamentally do not understand these people, but I'm told that they exist. And I realized in going through this process that Carrie was one of these people. She wouldn't make a mixtape for her party. She'd just slap on, now that's what I call Music 7 or whatever compilation was available. And it was that moment, that specific telling detail about her that suddenly opened the whole character up to me. And then I could start to fill in the rest of the blanks, and I could create a human being that wasn't just an avatar of myself. As a result of that, I started making this questionnaire, and I now do this pretty much with every character in anything I write these days. When I talk to the students about it and when I get them to do this, one thing I'm very clear about, though, is that the answers themselves are not that important. One of the questions is, what is their favorite flavor of ice cream? The answer itself is not important and probably will never feature in the work at all. It's the process of doing this questionnaire, of focusing in on these things and making it specific about that character. The other thing I tell them, the one rule, which is at the top of the sheet, is there can be no more than 3 items on the list that are the same as with you. Okay, so if your character is the same age as you, has the same number of family members, and has the same TV program, everything else must be different from you to keep them away from that. So that's a lot of talking. First part of the workshop is I would like you to fill in this questionnaire. It can be anything. As I say, the production doesn't matter. It's the process. So quickly think of a character, anything you want, and have a go at answering some of these questions. I'll give you a few minutes. We don't need breakout rooms for this. You can just quickly note something down on a bit of paper. So go. do that. I'll leave it.
Okay, just to check, we've got a few minutes to fill in that questionnaire for an imaginary character. Is that right? Individually, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see the chat just now, Ian, but Suzanne mentioned how about things like their least favorite color?
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, an opposite of one of those questions. Is that okay as well?
Absolutely, yeah. At the bottom, there's a space for any other information. And I say to the students, like, just go whatever direction takes you. So add your own questions, ignore questions if you don't want to answer them. It's entirely about the process. So yeah. All right, I'll give you one more minute. It doesn't matter if you answer all the questions or not. All right, let's stop there. I'm going to unshare the screen. So if you still need to look at the questionnaire, it's in the chat. Right, what we're going to do now, what I do next with the students when they bring this into class is I use it for a few different activities in the classroom. But the one we're going to do just now is the role play. What I do is I put them in pairs and you have to talk to each other in character. Ask each other the question. So what is your favorite ice cream? And give the answer from the character. Okay. I do this with them partly because it's fun. Role play is always good fun. And it breaks up, writing classes are often just sitting at a desk and writing. But it's also very useful for getting to think more about the character as a character. Doing the role play sort of separates it a bit more from them and gets them to do that. So Charu, can we put them into breakout rooms, please? Ideally 2 in each room. I'm not sure if that works out mathematically. 2 people in each room, 5 minutes. And yeah, just quiz each other. You can invent your own questions as well and force them to think on their feet. Just try and have some fun with it. The people with their cameras off will obviously have to switch them on.
5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah. Thank you. a bit weird if I'm in there.
Yeah. Okay, great. Like your book collection.
Oh, thank you. It's,
I can.
I've got
But
another,
it's nice to see a library like that in Japan at someone's house.
another one downstairs. My brother-in-law is a carpenter, so
Oh, nice.
every when I buy too many books for what I currently have, I call him, please build some more. So keeps him in work and keeps me in bookshelves.
Okay, wait a second. Linda says she can't be in a room. Okay, so... Oh, okay, she's...
Hi, Charu. Could you put me in a different one? Because Linda just has to nip out for 5 minutes, so...
Sure.
I don't know or else, maybe just, it's okay. I can just stay here. I can tell you about my character.
Yeah.
I just said favorite TV program, Sherlock.
Okay.
He's a Japanese 35-year-old person called Taru.
Oh.
So I think you're right with the idea of changing from a man to a woman or trying to get into the head of someone that's not you. So as soon as you start to drill down and ask those questions, you know, Taru, who is Taru? Oh, well, he's single. You know, he's a software engineer. After that, it gets a bit vague, you know.
Yeah, it's so easy as well to just fill in the gaps with your own tastes, because then you don't have to do research and things like that. You can just go, oh yeah, they like what I like. I already know what that is.
Yeah. I mean, like the lottery question as well. I was thinking, what do Japanese people want to do? Well, they want to have a bit of freedom. So maybe he wants to live by the beach. You know, winning the lottery would mean, you know, freedom to move to the coast and not have to live in the city kind of thing. Or in your case, live in the countryside, you know. And then getting stuck a little bit. I mean, dream is to be a musician or maybe a surfer.
Cool.
So thinking of the Chiba lifestyle, because
I want to meet this guy now. Sounds fun.
yeah. I mean, again, that's so close to what I'm imagining being in Chiba. So it wasn't really very fictional. I was just, you know, I didn't really get very far with that.
It's almost impossible to get completely away from ourselves when we're doing this. It's just to try and put some distance in there. It's all, you know.
The time machine question's quite hard as well, isn't it? Because it's then you're thinking. I mean, I wrote down go to like France to the 19th century, but that doesn't have anything to do with Taru, the surfer. So like the idea that you might come out with doesn't really, you know, link with the other things. So that's why it forces you to do that.
Yeah, and it just makes you aware of it as well. Like, as I said, it doesn't really matter what the actual answer is. The process of going, oh, actually, that's probably not what this character would like. That's kind of as valuable as coming up with any kind of specific answer. Yeah, when I realized she didn't like music at all, I was like, wow, this person, I don't think I could ever be friends with this character. We have nothing to talk about, but that's her, and that was her all through it. And it was nice because it meant, right, that's now excluded from the story. I can't just pull in random musical stuff when I've run out of things to say.
Especially when your setting is quite familiar, like in that book, you know, a lot about Aberdeen and the Northeast. And so that must have been quite difficult to separate, you know, the fact and the imagined.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there that isn't, like the area she lives in that book is where my mother lives now. It's, you know, it's parts of Aberdeen I know very, very well for personal reasons. But there's, yeah, setting and character, you can sort of balance it out, and as long as it's not, I suppose that the best thing that anybody ever said about it was when my dad read it. And he was like, you know, after about 2 sentences, I stopped thinking of this character in your voice. It was her voice and separate. Like, okay, that's it working then. That's how it should.
That's good, yeah. And with this activity, you're probably going to tell us, but you know, the students get quite into this idea of the role play. They quite like this part of it.
Yeah, they do, because you know what writing classrooms are like. It's often just silence and get on with your drafts and
closing the breakout room.
Yeah.
No, it's really nice, active way to get the students out of their shell. I expect they really like really like that. And you mentioned a lot of your students have studied abroad at some point. You said like almost all of them. That's a high number.
I think so, yeah. I mean, by the third year, by the third year, the students are either overseas or mostly just come back from overseas, which means this year is awful for them. It's so
yeah,
shame.
That's true. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Is everyone back? Excellent. Right. So that's that activity. I do a few different activities with that we would. What's happened? Yeah, I do a few different things with that, but that's the most fun one. So I thought we could do that. Then I've lost my place. So yeah, that activity with the questionnaire, you can do it with a main character, you can do it with a number of characters. I will come back to that questionnaire during drafting a story or a novel. I'll come back when I'm finding problems with a character or can't work out what to do next, the kind of writer's block with characters, then I'll come back to that questionnaire, and I keep them handy so I can always check things. So that's one class. At the end of that class, I then set up the next activity for homework, which we're going to quickly do. I'm slower on time than I thought I would be. This next activity, I should say in the interest of full disclosure, I nicked wholesale from the novelist David Mitchell. This is not my activity at all. I saw him read in Aberdeen in 2005, and during the Q&A, he spoke about his technique for developing voice. And if you've read any David Mitchell, you know that his voice is very, very important to his writing. He tends to flip between a number of different characters with one story, even short stories. If anyone's read his brilliant story, A Variation on a Theme by Mr. Donut in Granta, which I thoroughly recommend. It's a great study in voice. So what he does, and what I've done since then, and what I get my students to do, is to write a letter from the character to yourself. And I always say letter when I talk to the students, because if I don't say letter, they tend to think in terms of line messages and text messages, and you get like 2 sentences back at the end. So a letter, a long email from the character to yourself as the writer. I don't give them much in the way of guidance with it. It can be about anything. Again, production is not as important as process here. Usually it would just be a sort of rambling introduction from the character. And this is where the details they've done in the questionnaire comes in, but also the voice of the character starts to develop a bit. Yeah, it's kind of like, I think of it as a free-form role play that takes place on paper rather than acted out as we've just done. You role play writing a letter from that character's point of view. I give them this worksheet, which again, I'll put into the chat and then share my screen. There we go. So that should be available to you. And yeah, so this is what I give them for homework. Task: write yourself a letter, or write a letter to yourself from your character. Try to use their voice to talk about things they would be interested in. See the example below. So this example, this is my actual letter. I did this for The Waves Burn Bright. This is one of my main characters, Carrie. And just start off the letter. Dear Ian, it's nice to meet you. My name is Carrie. I'm 41 years old and I live in Hawaii. I work at the local university studying volcanoes. So starting off with basic details, and then it develops and gets longer and longer. For that novel, I did 6 of these letters, 1 each for the 2 main characters, for their partners and for their ex-partners, because that's a big part of the story. Doing this for me and for my students achieves 2 things really. Firstly, you start to develop the voice of the character naturally. It just comes to flow as you're doing it, the same as it would with a role play. Sometimes, and certainly this is true for the students, it's often in their own writing voice, and that's okay. You know, some writers are more developed than other writers. We have more experience than other writers. Again, production is not what this is about. It's about the process of going through it, of thinking about it. By this point in the year, in the creative writing year, they have developed their own writing voice through their travel writing and their poetry and everything. So this can start to change it. They can start to think a bit more about how different voices would sound. So if their character is, you know, if they're a 21-year-old Japanese woman and their character is a 95-year-old Japanese man, they will automatically start writing in a different register. It's very useful for that. The other thing is it, as I say, it completely pushes you away from the character being yourself, because you're imagining writing to yourself. It forces you to take an opposing position or a contrary position. I do this a lot now. I do this with every time I develop a character now. It's very, very useful. And the more you do it, the more the students do it, the more we as writers do it, you get better at it. It becomes kind of instinctive to slip into another voice. Again, the things you actually write in it probably won't make it into the actual work. This is just like a preparation thing, but they're very, very useful to come back to later on. If you get writer's block or lose your way somewhat, they can be very good for that. So we've got a little bit of time left. So what I want to do is, like the questionnaire, I'll just give you a few minutes and I would like you to start the letter. Obviously, we're not going to have time to write everything. So just like the first paragraph, dear whoever, it's nice to meet you, and just write yourself a paragraph and try and think into someone else's headspace, into someone else's voice. Try not to use the sort of idiosyncratic vocabulary you maybe normally would. So I'll give you a few minutes for that. Go. About one more minute and then we'll call it quits. All right, cool. I'll stop you there. Not enough time to write the whole letter, so it'll be good. It's always fun doing writing classes online, looking at everyone's window and going, are they writing or are they checking their phone? What are they doing? So cool. So those are two activities I do with the students. As I say, I get them to submit the questionnaire and that letter to me when it's finished. It's done as homework and then they submit it, but it's not graded. It's not assessed. I just ask them to submit it so that I can make sure they're actually doing it, and then I can use it to prompt them later on when it comes to other parts. And yeah, I use these myself still when I'm writing fiction. Not writing anything really. It's very, very useful activities that I recommend to you. In the next class after this, we move on to plot, and I talk to them about that. So that's a topic for a different presentation. So I will end there. And if we have any questions, we're doing questions now, aren't we? Is that right?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ian. Give you a